Hi everyone and welcome to another video. Today is all about the growing conditions that Japanese maples need in order to grow really well and thrive in your garden. Let's get started with the climate zones. Japanese maples typically grow in the USDA climate zones or hardiness zones 5 to 8 or 9. Now, maples can also grow in zones that are lower than 5, but it will depend on the cultivar and your local conditions in your garden, whether that's possible or not. It may simply be the case that the maple isn't hard enough in order to survive in a really cold climate zone. Also, maples may grow in climate zones that are higher than 8 or 9, which means warmer climate zones, but there the issue may be that it's just too warm for the maple, and maples are deciduous trees. That means they lose their leaves in autumn due to a change in temperature, and they need that in order to go through their normal growing cycle. So anything higher than 8 or 9 may simply be too hot for a maple. Our garden is in the climate zone 6 and all maples are growing really well here. Japanese maples grow in any normal type of soil range. The soil, however, should be nutrient rich and also well draining. So if your soil is more on the sandy kind of side, it may be a little bit too draining and gets too dry too quickly. If your soil is on the other side of the spectrum, so more towards a clay type of soil, it may be a little bit too hard and maybe even retain too much water. In our garden here we have a loam type of soil which retains a lot of water. It can also get a bit hard, especially when it gets dry, and what we do when we plant Japanese maples is to mix in the existing soil with planting soil we just get from the store. Here you can see a close-up of our loam soil in the garden, and around this maple the soil is a little bit darker in color, and that's because that's still soil from the original root ball, but also that is soil from our garden mixed in with planting soil, which we typically do when planting Japanese maples. And this gives a really nice mix of soil that retains enough moisture but also drains well enough for the maples. Another point to consider when growing Japanese maples is the soil pH. So also here Japanese maples grow typically in a normal pH range plants grow in. However, the Japanese maples prefer a slightly acidic pH range of between 5.5 and 6.5. So 7 would be neutral, anything below is slightly acidic to acidic. What can you do if you don't know the soil pH of your garden? Alternative number 1 is to get a company around to get your soil pH determined professionally for your garden. Or alternative number 2, and this is what I did years ago, is to buy a quite inexpensive soil test kit that is available online or in stores. And how it works is that you get a description and some liquid with it and some little container, and you just take a few different soil samples from your garden, mix that together, mix all that with the liquid you get with the kit, and then the color of the liquid typically will tell you the soil pH of your garden. For our garden here, the result was a pH of around 5, which is perfect for Japanese maples and many other Japanese plants. In case your soil pH is a little bit too high for your Japanese maples, you can, in order to lower it, just mix in a little bit of rhododendron soil, which is typically acidic, with your planting soil you plant your Japanese maple in, and that should reduce the pH so that it is in a perfect range for your maple. Also, what the slightly acidic soil pH does for the Japanese maple growth is that it contributes in a quite positive way to the autumn color of the maple. One example you can see here, this is the emerald lace maple, and it's the first one this year, quite early as every year, to have a beautiful autumn color. Maples can be planted in any position in the garden, from full sun to partial shade to shade even. When planting maples in shaded positions, it's just important that the place for the maple should not be too dark, otherwise it will not grow properly. And also the lack of sunlight will have an influence on the leaf color. I'll talk about it in a little bit. In partial shade or dapple shade positions, I find this is a very good middle ground for pretty much any maple cultivar, because it's not going to be too dark and it's not going to be too hot either in that position. And a full sun position is where most of, or a lot of our maples grow, and they're all doing well. It is so important to consider that in some places and some climate zones, the sun may be too hot. So we had that this year on some of our maples, that the leaves actually got scorched because it was just too hot during the summer for the maples in full sun positions. Also, another consideration is that the color of the leaves will change with the position of the maple. So what does that mean? For red-leafed maples, for example, the more sun they get, the more red the leaves will be. If they're more shaded out, the leaves will be rather greenish or have a greenish touch to them. And also in autumn, for the autumn color, I find that maples that are in full sun positions get a lot nicer autumn colors as maples that have a partial shade or even a shaded positions. And also maples in full sun positions typically get the autumn color a bit earlier than the ones that do not get that much sunlight. So let me show you a few examples of what I just said. Those two maples behind me are the same cultivar. They are coral bark maples or sangokaku. And this one here has a little bit more sun than this one. So here you can see, based on the autumn color that is starting, that there's only a little bit of color here, and the maple is still green at the back where it's quite shaded out. And on this one here, you can see, telling by the autumn color starting, that there's a lot more sun on this maple, and only the leaves at the very back there are still green. So this is what I meant with the autumn color will be more and sooner in a sunnier position as opposed to partial shade or even shade position. Here you can see a branch of an Atropopareum maple, so a red-leafed cultivar, but because this maple grows in partial shade, you see here clearly the difference. This branch end gets a little bit more sun than this side here. So this side gets basically no sun, and you see the leaves are staying green even though this is a red-leafed cultivar. And here you can see the transition from no sun to a little bit of sun where the leaves are turning red. And this is how Atropopareum maples look growing in full sun. Even though this year they're not as red as usually, which brings me to my last point regarding the position in the garden. So it's not only whether the maple grows in full sun, partial shade or shade, it's also different every year in my experience. So depending on the local climate, on the weather, how it is this year, how much rain you have, how much drought you have, how much sun, how many overcast days, the autumn color or the maple color will be different in every season. This is an example where leaf scorching occurred this summer. This is the first time we experienced that in our garden. And you see here that the leaves have brown areas, so they're really dead because they were just burned by the sun, and also they lost their color. And this maple has been growing in the sun for years in the same position, but never had this issue. Next, let's talk about the watering requirements. Japanese maples have average or normal water requirements, but the soil should be kept moist at all times. This is what maples prefer and what maples like. And this is very important when planting your Japanese maples, and especially when planting in spring or early summer season. That's because when planting at that time of the year, the weather goes towards a warmer and drier period, and the soil dries out a lot quicker and it gets hotter as well, as opposed to planting in autumn time, for example, where the weather cools down and the soil typically stays moist because you have more rain normally, depending on where you live in the world. And so when planting your maple in the early season, so spring or early summer, it's important to check every day at your maple if the soil is still moist enough, and if not, to water it so it doesn't dry out. Once maples are established and have been growing in the garden for several years, like for example this palmetto maple right here, they can withstand drier periods during the summer and do not necessarily need watering every day. That's because the root ball is a lot larger compared to when the maple was planted, and it also goes a lot deeper into the soil where more moisture is typically retained. So that means the maple can still draw moisture from the soil even though the surface or the upper layer of the soil may be dry from the hot weather. A maple of this size, for example, in summer when it gets really hot here, I water maybe every second or maybe third day, but not on a daily basis. Younger and less established maple, like this orange tree here, I am checking on a daily basis in summer when it's really hot and dry, and make sure it has enough water. And this is also important for maples that are grown in pots. That's because the root ball is a lot smaller. The pot may or may not be located in the sun where it gets warm and dries out a lot quicker. So any maples growing in pots should be watered on a daily basis in the hot summer months. Last but not least, which fertilizer do maples need? Maples just need a normal plant or tree fertilizer, or alternatively you can also use compost soil. Now there are different opinions or recommendations how often to fertilize and which fertilizer exactly to use. Now this is up to everyone to decide. It also depends on the nutrients in your soil or the type of the soil you have. What we do here in our garden is that we fertilize the maples once a year in springtime. That's for us about March time, end of March, beginning of April, depending on weather, with a slow release organic fertilizer. And that's enough for our maples because we have quite nutrient rich soil and there is no more or no additional fertilization needed here really. So everything grows really well, and some of them even faster than they should. And this brings me to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.